Are you a fascist? What does it mean to be a fascist? What is fascism? When did fascism start on the world stage? Is that the same as being a dictator or a tyrant or a Nazi? Do we have people in our own government that are fascists? And what is an anti-fascist? I mean, it's all so confusing these days, and you've probably heard someone call someone that you like or don't like a fascist. So we thought we'd clear the air a little bit today and talk about all of that and more on today's episode of Theology on Air. So welcome back to Theology on Air. We are, as we always say, because we want you to come if you live in Houston, an offshoot of Theology by the Pint, which is a ministry here in Houston where we drink delicious beer and we talk about all kinds of fun things around theology and faith and culture and philosophy and ideologies and all the odgies. And sometimes we do get into politics and geopolitics and that kind of thing, but we get to dive a lot deeper here on the podcast. And so we're going to do that today. And we're going to explore this idea of fascism and how Christians should think about things like government and government leaders and who we should like and who we should not like and why they're likable or not. And it's more than just being likable. But we've invited back a guest that we really enjoyed talking to last time, Dr. Owen Anderson. So instead of giving you his fancy bio, I'm just going to have him tell you who he is again. And then just remind us who you are.
Yep.
Actually, let me also tell people to go to the website. We should always do the little housekeeping, theologybythepint.org. You should go there to learn how to give to the future of Theology by the Pint. You can learn about our events. You can learn about our leadership, what we believe, all that good stuff. So check that out. Subscribe to the podcast. Do all the things. And then let's talk about fascism. So, yeah, ring a bell. I don't know. Give us a review. Hit 5 stars. I don't even know how many stars it is. I don't know if you can do that on Spotify.
We need more.
All the stars, which is the fullness of stars. So, Dr. Anderson, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then maybe just start giving us a little bit of an intro to what fascism is.
Yeah, so I'm Owen Anderson. I'm a professor of philosophy and religious studies at ASU. I'm also pastor of a Reformed church here in Phoenix, Christ the King. And that phrase, Christ the King, will probably come up as we talk about fascism and how that word is thrown around. I'm the one very important thing right now is that I'm the faculty representative for the ASU's TPUSA student club.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we had a really remarkable memorial, student-led, student-organized for Charlie Kirk, and ASU was very gracious. They let us use their basketball stadium. We had thousands of people show up. I spoke there about comparing Charlie Kirk to Socrates, and we had a number of TPUSA officials there, lots of students speaking, and so it was really beautiful. But the problem is, leading that into what we're saying here, and let me add one more thing. I don't represent ASU. They've asked me specifically to say, you only speak for yourself, not us.
Yes.
But leading into us here is TPUSA students just today, TPUSA posted a picture that was put up at ASU of Charlie Kirk in crosshairs right on his neck. And a quote from Charlie Kirk taken, this has been the one that the liberals are throwing around. Something he said about the Second Amendment taken out of the setting he was talking about.
Right.
Almost always, whenever someone, just for your audience, I'm sure they already know this, but whenever you hear Charlie Kirk, a quote that sounds really weird, if you look at it, like 90% of the time, he's making the opposite point.
Yes.
It'd be like me saying, quote unquote, and then I say something that Hitler said, and people just take the quote from Hitler and say, look,
exactly.
Yeah. So it's nonsense. But so it comes up for us because if professors are calling TPUSA a fascist organization, and they've got hundreds of students at ASU who are TPUSA students, how are those students supposed to process that, especially if they're in those classes?
Yeah. Real quick, you keep saying TPUSA. That stands for Turning Point USA. I realize most people know what we're talking about because it's been so much in the news, but just in case someone has just come back from vacation and they don't know what's happening. Yeah. Charlie Kirk, the head of Turning Point USA, he was murdered a couple weeks ago, and he was not a fascist, but we'll get to that later. But there's been a lot of weird backlash against mourning for a great man who was killed so early. Anyway.
Well, especially what I point out, this is why I made the comparison to Socrates, is that what he did was he went to a campus, he set up a little tent, so he's not in the sun all day, and then he said, prove me wrong. And students loved it. And that means maybe especially students who disagreed with him. because they wanted to go down, and Charlie would let disagreeers come to the front of the
Yeah,
line.
cut the line. Yeah.
And they would say, "You're so wrong about LGBTQ. You're so wrong about DEI. You're so wrong about Trump." And they would have a debate.
Yeah.
And they would then post their debate, and they'd probably say, like, oh, I defeated Charlie Kirk. Look at
Yeah.
this. And
Yeah.
likes. And they loved it. And what was taken away from us by this murderer is those students who completely disagree with Charlie Kirk, they're no longer allowed to debate him either.
That's
so
right.
It's not a matter of if you just like Charlie Kirk or not.
Yeah.
It's a matter of free speech and free debate.
That's a great point. Yeah. I've been watching, I mean, I already watched a lot of his videos before and listened to his podcast. I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of him, I'm sure. But afterwards listening, and it's, you know, a lot of the stuff that's kind of coming up on my feed is people that start to disagree with him and then walk away saying, well, I still disagree with you, but thank you. This was fun. This was cool to be able to like kind of go back and forth and disagree and be gentlemen with each other, as
that's
he was
part of what I said
as
well, is that the reason they loved it is they're not getting that in their classes anymore.
Oh, interesting.
Classes are indoctrination centers for far left-wing views, anti-whiteness, anti-heteronormativity, promoting LGBTQ lifestyles, we had an event today, so you were promoting polyamory, another one promoting how witchcraft is good for feminists. And so conservative students and Christian students, which this is at least 50% of the student body, if not more, taking national averages here in Arizona and there in Texas, it's going to be larger.
Sure.
But the faculty don't represent their students.
Yeah.
The College Fix did a study in November of last year at ASU, and it came out to something like 97% left or far left and 3% conservative. And that's not what the population looks like.
Right.
And it's the same thing for atheism, right? The atheists will far outnumber Christians in the faculty. And so for these left-wing faculty who are very concerned about representation, very concerned about looking like the community you serve,
diversity,
have failed.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and you came on our podcast last time. If people want to go back and listen to that, they can. And you talked about that you're kind of fighting the school on some of the DEI stuff. And we talked a lot about that last time. So I encourage listeners to go back and listen to our first episode with Owen Anderson. But this time I wanted to have a little history lesson because this word fascism is thrown around everywhere, long before the Charlie Kirk thing, even before Trump was on the scene, but especially, once Trump was running for office. But I was just mentioning before we started recording that I was following a particular politician, not Trump. And a friend of mine was like, oh, I would never vote for that person. They're the biggest fascist of all time. And I kind of chuckled, like, of all time? Yeah. I mean, I think there's some pretty terrible world leaders that would, take that title. So, but if we hadn't had history class and we don't know about, I don't know, Mussolini or any of the sort of start of fascism, and maybe I'm wrong about who that is, tell us, how did it start? What is it? What does that word mean?
Yeah, and I think, can I add to your story about your friend telling you that? My favorite is when I hear people say, this politician, sometimes Trump, sometimes not a conservative, this politician is worse than Hitler.
Yeah.
So they'll make the specific connection, and you wonder, do you know what Hitler did?
Exactly.
I don't think you do. Now, what does that show us? I think, as a philosophy professor, as a logic professor, it shows us just the low quality of thought going on the left. Now, someone can say, oh, yeah, but what about? And do a whataboutism about the right. Yeah. I'm sure you can find low quality thinking on the right, dumb posts on social media. But right now we're focusing on the left because they're the ones in charge. And free speech especially protects us to object to whoever's in charge. And so the poor thinking is labeling your opponent with something they don't agree they are. And it's a negative thing in the community's mind. Indeed, not just negative, it poses a threat in the community's mind. And so when I say labeling them with what they don't think they are, what I mean by that is most of the professors I interact with call themselves Marxists.
Oh, wow.
Now, Marxism has a spectrum, right? So they might say, well, I'm not a Marxist, I'm a this, but it's under the umbrella of Marxism.
Sure.
And they would not view that as an insult. So when I say they're a Marxist, it's not the co-equivalent thing of them saying they're a fascist.
Because they agree with you.
Yeah, the mainstream conservatives don't believe that. You can find some nut online talking about, pro-fascism, but that's not the mainstream conservative viewpoint. Whereas on the left, if they don't specifically identify with Marx, as many of them do, they'll nevertheless just be quoting the Marxist dialectic about the oppressed and the oppressors.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing, is to notice, hey, if you don't agree with Charlie Kirk, just bring an argument out there.
Mm-hmm.
Prove him wrong in front of the whole crowd, and all the students will laugh at him, and he probably won't want to do that again.
Yeah.
But my suspicion is they can't do that, which is why they resort to insults.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
or violence.
ASU, go ahead.
Or violence.
Or yeah, well then that's what leads to it. So at ASU 2 years ago, our Barrett Honors College professors, 37 of 41, so almost all of them, signed an open letter calling Charlie Kirk and Dennis Prager and Robert Kiyosaki white nationalist bigots who attack their LGBTQ students.
Wow.
And
Attack.
So
that's a strong word
online.
too.
You can look it up. But you heard who the three were.
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk, Dennis Prager, probably the most famous Jewish intellectual in our country, and Robert Kiyosaki, Japanese American, that they're white nationalist bigots who attack LGBTQ students. Now, what those professors should have done was written a letter showing how the LGBTQ view is the correct one, and Charlie's conservative view of marriage is false. That would have been a great model to their students who they want to protect. Well, then model that behavior. But they can't debate. Their class, these are honors classes where you're supposed to debate the great ideas. They're not anymore. They're just pushing ideologies. And so instead of modeling that to their students, they just did a hit letter on Charlie Kirk. And so that tells us something's going wrong in the mind of the left. And I think part of the psychology is the following. They don't cultivate rationality. They cultivate emotional response, specifically things like empathy.
Yeah.
And so you're supposed to have the correct emotional response. And we all know that we can't usually reason ourselves into an emotion directly. Emotions kind of follow indirectly from what we think.
Mm-hmm.
And so they give up on rational persuasion, and instead they just try to use emotional persuasion. And especially one of the best ones is fear. And so fear of the other group, they're coming to get you.
Yes.
But then there's going to be some people then who say, well, I guess we should respond with violence. Maybe they've seen T2 a few times and they think, well, if that's true, if that's what Charlie is, then it's kind of like I'm going back in time and stopping him before a horrible future happened.
Right. Before a Holocaust. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so what it does then is it provokes those kinds of responses instead of saying, hey, I'm a professor. I think he's wrong. Here's my argument.
Sure.
I'd love to debate him.
Yeah. That's what we try to do at Theology by the Pint. You know, we take whatever the topic is and give arguments and counter arguments in real time. What's that?
There's a lot of enjoyment, whether it's between Christians with different beliefs or between political viewpoints.
Yeah.
Students used to love that about college. That's what I loved. I was
I did too. Yeah.
Undergrad. And then, back further, the 60s and 70s undergrads, they loved questioning the man and needing to critique things. I kind of joke that I'm like the last 70s professor, like
you're the hippie professor
who's like, I'm against the establishment, I'm against big business corrupting and censoring. And it's like, hey, wait, aren't all the liberal perspectives professors supposed to be saying the same thing? Why is a conservative Christian guy the one speaking up about big business censorship?
Yeah.
There's something else I started to wonder too, which is the labeling of fascist has a future chilling effect, because then, say, a Trump doesn't want to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So basically, if you come out with these like salvos, from the jump, he's a fascist, and we're all going, what are you talking about? Like, that's insane. Like, but what they're actually doing is they're setting a stage to where if Trump, say, I don't know, sends ICE into Chicago or something, right? Or the National Guard into Portland, or, we're going after the RICO to find out the funding of like Antifa outfits, then they're like, see, we told you, we warned you that he was going to use government force to quell free speech. And and it's almost like it can give them validation, but also it probably explains why someone like Trump, I think, has been hesitant to act. Like in his first term, he thought about designating Antifa a terrorist organization, never got around to it, probably precisely for this reason, because having been called a fascist, if he goes after Antifa, they've set the stage. They've handcuffed him ideologically, and only now, in the wake of Charlie's assassination, are we even more to the point where we're just like, we don't care. We don't care anymore. You can call us a fascist. You can call us a racist. You can call us a sexist. We don't care. Like, this has to be done now. We have to figure out who Antifa is. We have to figure out what what fascism is. We have to start to be clear in our language. We're not going to be bullied anymore. And sadly, it's taken us this long to get to that point. But I think that was part of the plan. Looking back was like it prevents future action. By creating a hostile atmosphere. So
well, that's the same with being called a racist. No one wants to be called those names. Yeah. And so you're right. You mentioned the chilling effect, which just real quick for the audience. That means there's not an overt law against speaking, but you know that you're under special scrutiny. And so, for example, I get emails from ASU sometimes, just basically that say, "Hey, we're watching you. You didn't break any rules. We affirm free speech, but just so you know, we're watching you." And say, "Wait a minute, are the liberals getting these emails too, or just me?" And that's the definition of the chilling effect, because then every time I post anything, I think to myself, "Well, wait a minute.
I hope that was okay." Yeah,
I know this is being read by the committee. What are they going to say about this? And the liberals free to just type away and send stuff off.
Yeah.
And so that is what happens to students as well. Students in classes know, conservative Christians know, my professor is anti-white. He talks about how bad Christian missionaries are. Well, I'm a white Christian guy who wants to be a missionary. So what do I say in class?
Yeah.
So the chilling effect is across the board, but I think you're right. That name calling like this is part of it. So let's look at the history real quick, just to give everyone a setting. What is fascism? And then is it relevant still today? So you've kind of already mentioned Italy. Fascism is a 20th century political ideology that emphasizes authoritarian, centralized, tyrannical government, national borders, and suppression of individual rights. And it's almost always connected with militarism. Well. So we can look at each one of those. Now, although it's 20th century, it's the same kind of tyranny you'll see in the past. And so there's always been demagogues. There's always been people who want to have, strong centralized governments that oppress the individualism in a country. But there's some things that made this even more harmful in the 20th century, especially technology, invention of mass media or increased mass media. We have a whole different level now of social media, but just the ability to use the radio and then later television. And so the ability to get this message out was increased. But the emphasis in European 20th century history, the fight was really between fascists and communists.
Okay.
So one really interesting thing, you can almost put money on this. I don't gamble, but if you did, if a professor is calling someone a fascist, that's because they're a communist. And in their mind, those are the only two possibilities. And the communists hate the fascists, and the fascists hate the communists. The war between Hitler and Stalin was a really important one for helping the Allies win, because it weakened the resources of the Nazis. And so what the fascists explicitly reject, they reject democracy, they reject communism, which is really their big enemy, but they also reject liberalism, classical liberalism. And so a lot of conservatives, I mean, if I had to put a number on it, I would say the vast majority of public intellectual conservatives today are just classical liberals. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, liberals. And it's interesting because that used to be, conservative Christians would argue against that view and say, no, we need the Bible involved in our government. And so the conservative has really moved, when the video will be this way, to the left. We're just classical liberals now. We're just arguing for the Bill of Rights. But fascism is against that as well. And so the first one who took this term was Mussolini. It's based on Italian word fasci. And he starts around 1919, comes to power in 1922. And the word fascism and the word fasci is from that image. You sometimes see representatives having a pin of it, where it's a combination of a bundle of rods tied together with an axe there. And it's actually, it represents unity and strength through authority. So it's used by other groups as it's older than the fascists, but that's where the name actually comes from. And so let me distinguish them, communism and fascism. If they're both strong centralized governments, what's the issue? Well, the word at root is nationalism. The communists from the very beginning were the workers of the world. Workers of the world unite. They're globalists. They don't, they would say national boundaries are artificial, or they're rooted in racial characteristics, which are unjust. And so communism's for the whole world. Well, the totalitarianism of fascism gets in the way. because now it's saying, no, these are absolute borders and this is our nation, and it makes us versus them. And then connected with that, it also is the fascists affirm private property to some extent. Even though there's a great overlap in fascist countries between government and business, you still own your stuff, compared to the communists who would say private property is the source of all evil. And that's what Rousseau said, is there was no sin, no moral evil until the invention of private property. And if we can just get rid of private property, we'll be able to perfect the universal human worker. And so those two views, they share a lot in common. They're both tyrannical views that want a strong centralized government to try to perfect a nation. And they both hate classical liberalism and the biblical tradition. And so the communist only has the fascist on his mind. And I've seen some videos shared about communist influencers from like the 50s saying, hey, the way to promote our stuff is by calling our opponents fascists.
Interesting.
In the United States in the 50s, we just defeated the fascists. We're Republicans in technically, not in the capital R party.
Sure.
Countries, the Republican democracy.
Hey guys, Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
So any questions so far?
Well, what I think is funny is, I'm going to show my age here, but when I was growing up, fascism and communism were both bad. So when you say, well, they were pitted against each other, my first thought is, oh gosh, well, which side would I be on? And if it's between the two, I guess maybe I'd be a fascist, if it's going up against communism, because communism, I'm thinking about growing up. Communism is like Hitler,
I would still say, I think we'd take the Bonhoeffer approach. That's what he was presented with also.
Okay.
Bonhoeffer. And he took the path that wasn't popular among Christian pastors in Germany. He took the path of, I'm actually going to try to assassinate Hitler and his generals. And it was, of course, thrown in prison, did some of his most famous writing in prison. Or on the communist side, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, one of my favorite authors.
Yeah.
If you like Russian literature, read One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which is about a prisoner in Siberia. Just great Nobel Prize winning literature. The idea of fascism comes to us in pop culture with this idea that, well, that's the right and communism is the left.
And when you say right, left, you don't mean right like correct. You mean right as, yes, right and left, like Republicans and Democrats in America kind of thing.
The problem for Republicans in America is they'll tend toward fascism, and the problem for leftists is they'll tend towards communism, and that's completely false.
Okay. Yeah, talk us through that.
And communism are both on the left.
Okay. Say that again.
Yeah, communism and fascism are both on the left. That's why they hate each other so much. They're fighting over the same territory. They both agree a strong centralized government can perfect humanity. The right says, I want limited government, mostly out of my business. I want to have individual freedoms that are protected by the government, and especially the protection. One of the most important things the government does is protects contracts that are freely entered into, so that when someone violates a contract, they're held responsible for that, which allows for there to be large-scale business. Free enterprise. That's just not business, because communists and fascists are like, we have business, free enterprise.
What do you call so if there's communism and fascism, what's sort of the ism on the right? Capitalism?
Yeah, that is definitely a good way to show who their enemy is, because they both hate the capitalist, right?
Yeah.
But then we got to spell that out maybe for people. Okay, well, what's capitalism? Well, what I mean here again is what I just mentioned. Limited government. And that's what's the difference between the left and the right. The left believes we can change the nature of a human through government intervention. And that's been the temptation for humanity, really going back to Nimrod and the Tower of Babel.
Yep.
A strong centralized leader opposing God's law and saying, I can create a society that's better. And that's why we're told Abraham was looking for a city whose maker and builder is God, because he'd already seen humans trying to set up their own cities under their own laws, not under God's law. And so for us Christians, not just conservatives, but for us Christians, that brings in a new element to the discussion, which is, okay, but where in this spectrum is God's law? Because you could also be a capitalist and be a pure just materialist. You just want to make money to indulge your senses. And that's the kind of abuses that the communists will point out. They'll say, you guys want capitalism? Look what it turns into.
Yeah.
Well, the corrective isn't just more capitalism. The corrective is, you're right, left to themselves, on either side of the spectrum, humans in sin do some really disgusting things.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think conservatism then, as I think we would all want to define it, would be a combination then, of something like free enterprise, Christian respect for law, Christian, well, and the gospel.
Respect for law is a good one too.
Yeah. And so what am I leaving out? But there's more to that. I mean, I think a beauty, there are certain Christian aesthetics there that derive from Christian theology. So yeah, it's a combination of things. Yeah, but republicanism, I would say limited government, so if there's an ism on our side, I think it does have to be republicanism, and the old Benjamin Franklin quote, "Republic, if you can keep it." Yes, we're a democracy, like in a manner of speaking, but we're a republic in a more important manner of speaking, I would say. So, yeah.
That's 100%. That's the right word to land on. And I'm a Presbyterian. And so in the English speaking world, that's where we get republicanism, is the Presbyterians opposing the King of England. And opposing the expansion of the Church of England into Scotland. And the idea being somewhat related, based on Scottish Presbyterian church government. You send 2 representatives, 2 elders from each church. Each state gets 2 senators. And then you have representatives based on population, and you vote, and you're under a law. So all that stuff, intellectual history of that, it has one branch there. Republicanism wasn't invented by the Presbyterians, but it's certainly in the English world, in modern history, that's where it rose. So I think that the word Republican is a good one. We don't want to lose representative government, the rule of law, the ability to debate. The whole point of representative government is what we were talking about at the beginning. You get to debate. And when you watch Congress or Senate today, it's really sad, because what it is someone just going up there and
grandstanding,
insulting the other guys, and then getting applause from their side and sitting down. Rather than saying, look, here's your belief. You believe that if we do the following, this result will happen, and I'm proving that's wrong. So I'd love to see the return of actual debate in the government.
Let me go back to the Mussolini thing for a second and ask a couple questions. One, for those that weren't paying attention in history class or didn't learn it, like, what did Mussolini do that was so bad? And how is that different from Hitler? And where does Nazism come into all this?
Yeah. All right, good. So Mussolini is kind of subordinated, because compared to Hitler, he didn't do bad things. Maybe being in support of Hitler and Nazism would have been the closest, but he did bad things in this sense, that he wanted this strong centralized government. And 2 things I need to emphasize from him are the state is everything. That's another very important liberal view for communists and fascists that the conservatives don't share. We believe there are other institutions that are equal, not under the state. The family is not under the state. The church is not under the state. I point this out. Sometimes students ask me, hey, it seems wrong that ministers aren't taxed, and churches aren't taxed. And there's I don't know what you mean by that seems wrong, but it's a very important principle. The state has no power to tax the church. It's an equal to the state. To tax something, you're above it. And so if the state began taxing ministers, it's asserting authority over the ministers, and the ministers should all say, absolutely not. It's not a money issue. It's an authority issue. But
interesting.
Mussolini said, yeah, the state is everything.
It's kind of like when like Randy Weingarten, to the head of the teachers union, says our kids,
Hillary
it's
Clinton
like
said that too. I have an article out today on the Blaze about Hillary Clinton, who last week told us to get back to objective truth and facts, while also not knowing what a woman is.
Yeah. Yeah. But when the state is everything, then my kids become the state's kids.
Oof.
And that's how the public schools seem to think of it.
And we see that happening with the transgender stuff.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Those surgeries. No, you're 100% right. It's a great addition. And then the other thing to add is the idea of the will. This again comes from Rousseau down to Nietzsche, who we know is influencing the Nazis. And then in our academy today, the greatest disciple of Nietzsche is Michael Foucault. And he is cited by our academics in journals more than Aquinas, more than Augustine, more than Calvin. I mean, it's something like 1.5 million citations for Foucault.
Wow.
I once was listening to Jordan Peterson, and he was bragging about how an article of his, he thought this was great. An article of his got 2,000 citations, and that is great. I don't get 2,000 citations, but look at the difference between those two. So, in other words, Rousseau's view of the will, it has shaped the atheist left, and that includes fascism and communism. And his view of the will is just that the community's will is the absolute. It is what determines good or evil. Now, the problem here is there's a lot of problems, but one obviously is that how do you know the will of the people?
Yeah.
One way is to vote, but then that can get corrupted. And usually the tyrants don't like voting anyway, even if they think they might win, because they know that voting is easily swayed by last minute propaganda, and they don't like that uncertainty. Okay. And so how do you know the will of the people? Well, thankfully we have tyrants who will tell you what the will of the people is, right? And that the will of the people happens to be the very thing the tyrant wanted to do in the first place.
It's such a coincidence. So, yeah.
But it's so important to see that what's going on here for Christians. The emphasis on the will, I believe, is traceable to the first sin. You don't have to listen to God. You can will what is good and evil yourself. Because as creatures, we don't know good and evil the way God does. We do know good and evil, but we know it by discovery of what God made. And we have to subordinate ourselves to God and recognize he created the world. He determined what good and evil are for us. And the temptation was, you don't have to listen to God. In fact, no problem, no consequences will come up. You won't die if you don't listen to him. You
right.
Just do whatever
you'll be like him. Yeah.
You'll determine good and evil. And so people like Freud say that this literally meant they didn't know good and evil at all before the fall, which would be ridiculous because that means they don't know that you should keep commands of God either. Which means
right, and then they can't be held responsible for also going against the will of God. Yeah.
So what the Luciferian does, you probably know the main quote, first quote in the Luciferian Bible: "Do what thou wilt is the whole of the law." Your will is the whole of your law. And so for you individually, that's absolute. But then when you talk about corporate working together, the will of the people. And so you'll see that with the communist tyrants and fascist tyrants, they all say they're speaking for the will of the people, rather than the logos, which is the light of our mind. And God works through, and the Holy Spirit, for example, works through sanctifying us by the truth. And that's how we transform our minds, not just directly affecting our will. And so the contrast, I think, is maybe the very essence of the contrast of the difference between the city of man and the city of God. The city of man is the beast that uses force and tears its enemies apart. And the city of God advances by the proclamation of the truth of God and persuading others to believe. And that's why, small o Orthodox Christianity is the furthest thing from fascism. And that's why it's very silly that its opponents say that.
Yeah. So going back to Mussolini then, I mean, what happened in history? Why is his name in the history books? Did he effectuate some major change? And you said he supported Hitler, but Hitler was not a fascist. Hitler was, go ahead.
He brought about fascism in Italy, which you could say started off the nationalist turn in the early 20th century. And so what that did was it kind of ignited thinking on the part of the Germans. Well, first I should say there's also Spain and Portugal who are struggling under this, and their struggle, their wars go longer. We have Hemingway writing about this in the 1950s and fantasizing on the side of the communists against the fascists. And so the idea that inspired national socialists like Hitler was this idea that a people group exists, it has a will of its own, and it needs to keep that will pure, coupled with the very bad peace of World War I, which put Germany under severe economic strain. So that by the time Hitler's coming along, it's in a significant depression, and he's speaking to people who just want some change. And then he begins speaking to them about how they should be proud of who they are, and they have a great national heritage. And he makes their economic opponents, Jewish bankers, he makes them the bad guys, and people are listening.
Interesting.
But all of it has to do with the reason why it's on the spectrum against communism is it's that national focus instead of the workers of the world unite. And so there are German Marxists who see this and they say, no, this is getting in the way of our plans. We're here to wake up the workers, and now the fascists are making them only concerned about Germany. And a lot of those intellectuals the United States rescued out of Germany because they, as communists, they were being persecuted, potentially killed by the Nazis. And they came to the United States and filled some of our university professorships like Herbert Marcuse, and really the way the Frankfurt School influenced the United States through communist professors that we believe we were helping out, but they just came with their same hatred of Christianity and hatred of the Christian tradition that all the communists had.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So Mussolini, fascist, Nazi, National Socialist, which so was Nazi, I mean, sorry, was Hitler a communist?
No, he's a nationalist. So national socialism, Nazism means national socialism. So the socialism part
Okay.
comes in that the government, the nation or the state is everything. So the nation or the state does make sure goods are being distributed correctly by the businesses, but there's some allowance for businesses to have their own existence apart from the state. But if you've seen like Schindler's List kind of displays how this works. I mean, you really don't have freedom because if you do anything that the government doesn't like, you know you're going to be disappeared. So the government really is still totalitarian over everything. It just gives some appearance of private property and and emphasizes nationalism rather than workers of the world. So that was the message that the West was opposing, whether it's in communist Russia or it's in fascist Germany. And just like with communism, there isn't a desire to expand by fascists, right? They're taking over Poland, they're attacking Belgium and France, and they would like to conquer Britain. And that's about the point where the United States gets in to help the English.
Okay. So it's interesting. I don't know if I was just confused growing up or if it was because, you get taught about the Holocaust and then you immediately learn about Russia and the Cold War. And so maybe in my mind it was conflated. I think a lot of people think of communism and Nazism as the same. They're not. They
Well,
share
I think that
some.
people probably don't. People in political levels, leftist political levels, don't think that because they believe they're communists and they hate the fascists and the
Yeah.
Nazis. But and initially, Hitler and Stalin were allies, but Hitler broke the agreement, and then they went to battle, which diverted troops from the west to the east, which helped us in the west.
Okay.
I think it was Vincini that said from Princess Bride, "Never go to a land war in Asia."
Yes.
So you have examples of this: Hitler, Napoleon. You always lose, and
That's funny.
so. But from your perspective as a Christian, you might have thought they're similar precisely because of the tyrannical government.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of getting into maybe the psychology of the Antifa professor. What is the Antifa professor worried about? He's worried about a theocracy that imposes Christian, especially Christian sexual morality on a diverse population. And he's worried about a nation that tries to be quote unquote racially pure by having strict immigration laws. You can only have immigrants from this country, not from that country. So
Okay.
those two things begin to worry the Antifa professor. And in one way, you could say, oh, yeah, we're Americans. We have the First Amendment. We don't want one denomination in charge. That's a Presbyterian amendment because we knew what happened when the Church of England was in charge. But it'd be the same thing for anything. A good Presbyterian should say, no, we don't want forced Presbyterianism either.
Sure.
The gospel never proceeds that way. It always proceeds by convincing. Humans present the gospel. The Holy Spirit works in their life. It never works by saying, if you don't go to church on Sunday, we're going to fine you.
Sure.
And so the worries there are worries about either a completely straw man of Christians, or you can find some Christians who, stumble into this view of, nationally, we're going to enforce our brand of Christianity. And then the same thing with immigration is the immigration worry initially, I think, is racial, but I think really it's ideological. Are we allowing immigration from Christian countries and not from countries where they have enemies of Christianity? Because the worry is we don't want a majority of Christians voting, because then it'll still turn out to be the same way. They'll vote. They'll change the homosexual marriage law by voting, and then we'll have to live with their Christian marriage rules.
So you're really making a case that Antifa is anti-Christian. Well, anti their straw man or their caricature of Christianity, rather.
I think that's what's on their mind. I think many professors could probably articulate that. Some of them, they might have a first level articulation about like whiteness. Oh, it's the whiteness. But then when you say which whiteness, because you've got Marxist friends who seem to be under the whiteness, you mean the Christian whiteness. And that's what my article is about today, because Hillary Clinton last week said, we need to be worried about the white male Christians. Oops, she said that out loud. I wasn't supposed to say that out loud.
Yeah, she was like a certain religion or something.
Yeah, certain religion.
funny.
She didn't name Christianity. So white male, fill in the blank, like shamans.
She could have been talking about Muslims.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, a lot of. Okay, so let's get away from Mussolini and Hitler and those guys. Where today would you say there's actual fascism happening? Like if someone wants to call someone a fascist, is there anyone in the world today that is a fascist? Like is that North Korea? Is that like who's a fascist?
Yeah, North Korea is communist. They have workers of North Korea.
Okay.
There's no private property of any kind. So I'd have to look and see, are there any fascist dictators left? I think all of them have been overthrown. It might be what someone says about a conservative general. For example, South Korea was ruled by the military for quite a long time after the Korean War ended.
Okay.
And so they might say, well, that's an example. That's fascism. But you'd have to look and you say, wait, is the government, though, in South Korea, is it saying the state is everything? Because that's a key part. Being run by a military is not, by definition, fascist. That could be communist also. But that the military says, and that's all there is. We control religion, we control family, we control business, we control education. So really, the word I prefer is totalitarianism.
Okay.
And that comes in, the 20th century forms are fascism and communism, but it's come in many forms. It was what the Romans were when they killed Christians, because Christians wouldn't worship Caesar. That's totalitarianism. It puts God's law under man's law, and therefore it hates God's law, and it wants to destroy those who say, no, there's a law higher than you. And so I think that really Christians need to get good at identifying that, because the communists are almost doing a magic trick where they're distracting you with fascism and they're doing their communism thing.
Yeah.
And still end up in tyranny.
Interesting.
So an American is opposed to tyranny, even a non-Christian American.
Sure.
I don't think Ben Franklin ever ended up making a profession of faith in Christ, but he opposed tyranny.
Yes.
And so that's almost the essence of Americans, is to say, we don't want a big government. We want limited government.
Yeah.
And that's how Charlie Kirk started out, right? His TPUSA, the first poster was, big government sucks. No fascist would ever say that. That right there rules him out of ever being an actual fascist.
Yeah, watching his evolution was fun, because I think his evolution mirrored a lot of modern American conservatism, where we sort of became populist somewhere along the way. I mean, America first and this sort of thing. I think was Pinochet in Chile. Was he maybe the last kind of big name fascist?
I was thinking about South America, and I know that the American government, the CIA and the American government
installed fascists.
That'll be brought up, for example, by left wing. The 70s professor I was mentioning earlier will bring up dictators that the United States supported during the Cold War
and banana republics.
Yeah, but here's the thing. This is what I have to point out to students. Politics is real world, not fantasy world. It's not you can make up your little country however you want. It's the Soviet Russians want to put nuclear missiles in South America aimed at us. We don't want nuclear missiles in our hemisphere. That's one advantage we have, is we have nuclear missiles in Europe very close to them. They don't have that advantage. Now you got two options: a people's revolt that becomes communist and lets the Soviets put missiles in South America, or a military dictator. There's no other option. You can't make up. There's no Ben Franklin American Revolution. Right. Those are your options. Now, that doesn't mean in the ideal world you like those options. But the question is, do you believe it's a threat to have Soviet missiles in the Western Hemisphere? If that's a threat, then you have to do certain things to block it. And so that is one critique that Noam Chomsky and other leftist professors will aim at the United States during the Cold War. And, we can always go back and look at it. It's kind of like, armchair quarterback, 2020 hindsight. Could we have done anything different? That's also what gave us the Ayatollahs, who supported the Iranian Shah, because the other option at the time was the Soviets taking over Iran. That angered the people, so they had an uprising and put their Islamic dictator in place. And guess what? He's BFFs with the Russians, right? So it's not literally an extension of Russia, but for political purposes it is.
Yeah,
so
allyship.
What's going to happen?
I wonder if some of the Arab states today are kind of close to fascism. They do allow private property, but there's a very strong centralized government and strong rule. No, they're not Christian, obviously.
Family.
Something like that. I even wonder. I know obviously China is ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, but they they're not as communist as they used to be. We let them into the World Trade Organization. All of a sudden, I think China has more millionaires and billionaires than anywhere on earth. So they're obviously, using some kind of capitalistic, processes. Now, they have private property, kind of like, unless the government wants it, and then you don't. So
well, that's what's interesting.
Yeah. So
I love going to Vancouver, Canada. It's this beautiful city. I think I love the mountains behind it. I love getting up into Whistler and going hiking. But I noticed that there are Chinese students that come to Vancouver and they have like a 10-room mansion, 2 or 3 really nice cars.
Wow.
And the reason is, it's not that the student has the money. Their dad's trying to get money out of China into banks that he knows will be safe from being confiscated. And so what you do is you buy a mansion in Vancouver. And
oh, wow.
Or farmland.
My son needs to go to university and he's going to live there while he's at university. So yeah, there is still a tension of, is there private property or not? But whenever you look at a Marxist country, you'll see they do Marxism in the way they
Can you just real quick spell out what we've done? We've talked about this ad nauseum, but if somebody hasn't listened to all our other podcasts, quickly, like Marxism, can you put it in a nutshell?
Yeah. So I'm just using that word to be the same as communism. Marx is basically the philosopher of communism.
Okay.
And he teaches this. This is how you recognize communist philosophy. This is important for any college students or high school students who want to go to college. Marxism simply means that all of history is ruled by a materialist dialectic. What that means is there's the haves who oppress and the have-nots who are oppressed. And so when you go to university now, they're going to tell you about the marginalized sexual minorities. And they're oppressed by the white heteronormative.
You, Dr.
Christian.
Anderson.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Evan.
Yes.
Y'all are the worst.
Yeah. So the whole narrative is oppressor. So when you have a professor then who says, oh, no, I'm not a Marxist. I just believe all of history is about oppression. Say, come on, then you don't know yourself. That is Marxism. The specifically economic and power angles are what comes from Rousseau and Nietzsche and Foucault. Because we would agree there is a dialectic between good and evil.
Yes.
But that's not basically economic. It has to do with the goodness of knowing God. And the prophet Isaiah promises us that the knowledge of God will fill the earth as the waters cover the sea. Good winds. The great commissions fulfilled. So it's not the dialectic itself. It's the materialist dialectic and taking away marginalized from God's law and making it just anybody who's not in power because they're Christians. Maybe the best movie to illustrate this is Footloose.
This guy did not expect that. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, evil small town Christian pastor. Won't let the kids just have fun?
Yeah.
Just go drink and dance. What's wrong with that? So the idea that maybe it's not safe. His daughter died, I guess, in a drunk driving accident.
Yeah.
But no one doubt when they see the movie, no one doubts Kevin Bacon's character. I can't believe they remade it. You can't remake a Kevin Bacon movie. Is the good guy because he just wants people to have fun and be free.
Yeah.
And not have any authority, any Christian authority over them. So a whole generation of people who grew up on Kevin Bacon defying Christian authority go to college and the professors just reiterate that same message. The Christians are the bad guys. They don't want you to have any fun. They don't want you to love.
Yeah.
You love and they don't want you to love. So I think that again, maybe if your listeners leave with one concept, it'd be, I would say, tyranny.
Okay.
And so what Antifa is objecting to, the best reading for them is they're worried about state tyranny and about imposing morality by the state. And those are problems. But what they actually identify is simply the rule of law. The current immigration laws are being enforced. They're not race-based. They might be nation-based, depending if a nation hates the United States or not, but that's not the same as race-based. And people who break those laws are now being held accountable. So you can't say that law and order is tyranny. No, that's the very need for a civil government. I mean, read the preamble to the Constitution to protect us from enemies, foreign and domestic. If the government can't do that, what good is the government?
So that's what ostensibly an anti-fascist person thinks. But Antifa, that word gets thrown around a lot. I mean, if you're on social media, what's that?
That's what's on their mind, so to speak.
That's what's on their mind.
Thinking,
okay. And I think you're being very generous because.
Well, I'm trying to give like the best reading for them.
Yeah.
When they lay themselves down at night, they don't say, I'm a bully. They say, oh, I'm stopping tyranny.
But the way they're stopping it is violence, right? So, I mean, how does that get justified in their minds while you're putting yourself in their minds.
Bonhoeffer justified opposing the Nazis, right? They've been convinced they're actually stopping tyrannical government that wants to enforce whiteness on everybody. And so that's why I got to tell students, hey, the premises on which you live your life are so important, because when you have false premises, it's going to ruin all the choices you make. So they've been convinced of this anti-whiteness, anti-heteronormative narrative, and so they believe themselves to be freedom fighters. But what they're actually opposing is just the current laws. I mean, I remember when I turned 18, I bought a plane ticket to Paris. This is where you still had to go to a travel agent. And I bought a plane ticket to Paris. I got a backpack, and I got a return ticket in a month. And I told my parents, I'm going to go backpack around Europe. And I'll go into that story later as what. But was that safe? This is kind of before that was a thing. Is that safe? Are you okay doing that? But I was given good advice, which is, all right, you're going to be going to multiple countries. Research it and know their immigration policies. Know how long you can be there before you need a visa, and always respect their laws. Because if you come afoul of their laws as a foreigner, a lot of your rights are greatly diminished.
Yeah.
And so it was on me to make sure I understood French, German, Italian, Swiss, English laws, not on them to just do it to accommodate me, whatever I want. If I want to sleep in the Eiffel Tower, you got to let me. No, it's on us. And so the United States should have that same dignity to be able to say, well, we also have laws.
Right.
About how you come here, how long you can come here, and when you need to go home. And if you broke those laws, if we can't enforce our own laws, then we're not a country.
So it's not that it's wrong to be anti-fascist. It's just that the definition of fascism has changed. It's essentially come to mean what, normalcy from our point of view. So basically, John Lithgow in Footloose is a fascist, right? I mean, to bring it back to that
perfect definition of like a small town country pastor enforcing biblical morality on teenagers who just want to have fun.
Yeah.
So maybe this is what's interesting. We could kind of, wrap up with this, the kind of mind blower here, because I've been emphasizing tyranny. But the actual outcome of Luciferianism, of fascism, of Antifa is always anarchy, hatred of law. And that's what I think we see from Antifa. They're not They don't have any rational basis to be worried about a Nazi party,
right?
A fascist party, but they hate law.
Yeah.
Back to Luciferianism. I just want to do what I want to do, and the man keeps trying to stop me.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Real fast, thoughts on Nayib Bukele in El Salvador? Is he a fascist? Because he's Catholic, religious, pro-nationalist. They just set aside re-electing him, so he's kind of
asked about if that's what happened. Is that accurate? Because that when I saw that news, that disturbed me. I didn't look into it, so I don't know what his rationale was. But if he ended any kind of Republican or Democratic government, that's a big problem. However, he might say something like, "Oh, it's national security. We don't even have good elections. They're all tampered with by foreign influences." So I don't know that details of those cases very well. But I would always be against any kind of like loss of the ability to have a republic.
See, and I'm kind of getting to where what he did is so amazing, making it the most dangerous to the. I'm kind of like, whatever. I mean, he seems to be a trustworthy guy who made the country safe, and he punishes criminals. And I'm kind of like, if there was a guy in America that I don't know if Trump pulled that off, which he won't, but if he did, and he wanted to run again, like FDR got 4 terms, I might be like, okay, I'm open to it,
Well, yeah, you're right. I was thinking about that same thing with FDR getting all those terms, but I think I've seen that as well. I've seen some talk among otherwise conservative young men and women about how great it'd be to have a righteous king.
Right.
And of course, Plato talks about the philosopher king, and there's a lot of good things going when you have a king who's righteous. But the reason why we don't do that is we don't have any guarantee they will be, or if they are today, they will be tomorrow.
Yeah.
And here's what Solomon points out: you have no idea what their kid will be like. We have so many examples. If you want a hereditary monarchy, Solomon, great king; Rehoboam, terrible king.
Yeah.
And so, as humans, you recognize, there's some benefits to a strong executive branch that can just punish evil, but those benefits are greatly outweighed by the potential abuses that come with whoever's next.
Yeah.
So we want some protection, which is the term lex rex. Law is our king, not a human is our king. And then we need a system that keeps our kings accountable, which is why no kings.
Yeah.
Every Presbyterian's out there. Yeah, no kings, no bishops. Right?
That's funny.
Oh, wait, you mean something different than I do. or saying
Yes.
no one's above the law. When Biden and Comey put that on X,
Yeah.
it's
Thumbs
still
up.
true though. No one's above the
Yeah.
law. Neither are they. So I think the initial excitement we might think of when we see someone like that would be tempered by, well, wait a minute, what are the pitfalls? We really want to defend constitutional Lex Rex government.
I will say this: we sadly are out of time because we got a little bit of a late start. But do you have any sort of final thoughts on, as Christians are thinking about things like fascism, anti-fascism, communism, Marxism, these kinds of things, just any advice for how we ought to think, how we ought to view our leaders, what we can do from wherever we are here in America to
Yeah.
make our own communities better?
Yeah, let me mention a few things. First is just be educated in civics. And
Hmm.
so go back and read the founding fathers, read the debates they had, read about the French Revolution. Why was this so terrible? Why did we avoid that here? And how is the French Revolution just the father of the communist revolutions? So we're always
Hmm.
on this side trying to not have those kinds of revolutions. And so know what those issues are. Why did we structure the government the way we did? It's very wise. A lot of wisdom goes into our government.
Hmm.
And we should love it and want to protect it as Christians because it's aimed at doing what Paul says. Paul prayed for peace in his day that the gospel might flourish. And our
Hmm.
government is designed around that idea that we want to allow Christianity to, the Christian ministers aren't agents of the state, but the state provides us peace so churches can do what they need to do. And when the church fails at that, it's going to harm the state too.
Yeah.
The church isn't doing the gospel. The state, you're going to get corrupt politicians and they'll misuse the constitutional government for their own benefit. And it's not perfect. It can still be corrupted. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is think locally. Our government is the most things that influence your life are held at local city council meetings, and be involved. Go to those. Don't just think about every 4 years as a president. That is not as important as what's going on locally. But then third, I would say don't be afraid of the idea that Christianity does influence the state. So the
Hmm.
separation of church and state is not in the First Amendment. That's from a letter that Jefferson wrote.
Sure.
And the idea there is that has been used by atheists to teach us all that we have to agree to neutrality, that the
Yeah.
state and public schools are neutral. There's no neutrality at all.
Yep.
You either believe or you don't believe. There's either belief or disbelief. And so we need to scrap this myth of neutrality and recognize Christianity does influence the state. It can't be otherwise. To have coherent laws, they have to be grounded in God's law. And
Hmm.
there is a difference between moral and civil laws. They're not 100% equal,
Yeah.
but they're overlapping greatly so that the civil law that's enforced by the state is a branch of the larger moral law. So I encourage
Interesting.
people to understand those things and the importance of Christianity to any good government. Now, if someone says, I just don't feel comfortable though with the word Christian nationalism, well, how about this? How about a nation of Christians, a nation of people that love the Lord, want to live a life that pleases him, and want to share the gospel? That sounds like a really good nation.
Yeah, agreed. Well, and I think you would make Charlie Kirk proud by the way you said all of that.
Well,
And
that's too kind of you.
you're going to have to take up his torch, at least at ASU, and keep it going. But thank you so much for coming on. If
Oh,
people
yeah,
want to know more about you and the stuff that you write, teach, think, where can people find you?
Yeah, we can check me out. I'm a regular contributor at The Blaze. And then I also started a Substack, which is just dedicated to the kinds of things we're talking about with professors at ASU to give parents an inside look at, wait a minute. Do they really have classes on whiteness, anti-whiteness? So I do, my Substacks mostly focus on that. And then I'm on Twitter as well. And those are all, I try to keep them consistent. DR for Dr. Owen Anderson.
Okay, that's easy. Dr. Owen Anderson. It's all phonetic. So, Dr. Anderson, thank you again for coming on our
No
podcast. It's
problem.
always a delight to speak to you, and hopefully we'll have you back on again soon to talk about something else interesting. But until we see you again, until we see, or I guess not see, but until our listeners come back again, we encourage you as always to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.